All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all very much for coming to what is the third in the NYU Game Center guest lecture series. We are extremely privileged to have Warren Spector with us tonight, and I want to, before we begin, I want to say thanks to the people who make the Game Center possible and this lecture series possible. So thanks to the Rockefeller Foundation, to Sharon Chang and the TTSL Charitable Foundation, and other generous donors who've made this series possible. And thanks to all of you people for showing up. And thanks, Warren. I think, you know, it's whenever I told people that Warren was going to come, there was a palpable sense of enthusiasm. You are much loved, and it's interesting because I think the evidence for why that is in your ludography. So if you look at the games that Warren has been involved with over the years, games like Wing Commander and Ultima Underworld, System Shock, the Thief series, Deus Ex. These are games that they combine the most kind of advanced technical methods of game development with an interest in sophisticated, grown-up narratives, and at the same time, a real commitment to what games do best, which is a focus on player choice, player agency, consequence of player actions, and the emergent properties that happen when you have dynamic systems. So
Wait, you don't know me. You might like my talk.
So I think the point being that the games that you work on do what games do best, and also do what people wish games did more of, which are they're more kind of grown up and sophisticated and less kind of goofy and juvenile. And I think that's pretty consistent across your work. So with no further ado, I'm going to give it over to Warren Spector. Thank you very much.
So Frank didn't actually give me a lot of guidance. He just said, talk about whatever you want, introduce yourself, talk about your philosophy if you have one. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about my philosophy. Oddly enough, I even have one, and I talk about it a lot. And some of you may have seen some of what I'm going to show you tonight, and may have heard some of what I'm going to talk about tonight already. I figure if I keep talking about it long enough, people will start actually doing more of it. To your point, Frank, we need more people doing what games do best. I will warn you that I am called Wordy Bastard back in Texas. And so when I'm told I have 20 to 30 minutes, that might be a challenge for me, so I'm going to probably rip through this stuff. And I've got a bunch of video embedded in this talk that we can come back to if we have time. I'll probably zip past that for now. And this is also the first time I have given this presentation in this form. It's basically, my philosophy talk is usually lots of bullet points and lots of words and lots of stuff that you're not supposed to do in PowerPoints now that we've all read presentations in and Slideology and all that. So this is about a third of the way there to a new way of giving this talk. So we'll see how it goes. You're my guinea pigs. All right, so who am I? This is me. I'm never going to get a date as long as I live. I'm a serial killer. And that's my favorite. If you look at this picture long enough, you will see everything that is important to me when I was in grad school. But we're going to skip past that. I spent 3.5 years at Steve Jackson Games, where I in fact met my lovely wife right there. This is me being very, very self-satisfied the day I showed up at TSR. They made me the Godfather offer. Got me to leave Steve Jackson Games. I worked on a bunch of D&D stuff. This is what designers do when they're, I don't know, whatever we were doing then. I worked on a bunch of stuff in the paper game business, which was critical. It was actually really important in shaping a lot of what I've done in the electronic game space. I think it gave me a grounding that a lot of other electronic game designers don't have, and a lot of prejudices, frankly, that, have stood me in pretty good stead over the years. I've worked on a bunch of stuff. So this is at Origin. This is I will do anything if Japanese journalists ask me to do it. This is me testing Wing Commander what is that, Wing Commander 2, I think, anyway. On my 4633, holy cow. And this was the day we shipped Ultima Underworld. I don't want to explain what we were doing there, it's pretty wacky. This is Origin, after the day Electronic Arts bought us. The red dots signify everybody who left. One of the designers there, just every time somebody left, he would put a red dot on this portrait. You know, Richard Garriott and Jeff Hillhouse, the only two people who survived. So I've worked on 19 electronic games. Well, these are some of them. And in a very interesting way that maybe we can talk about it, you know, at some point. I really do see everything I've worked on as a sort of an evolutionary progression along a pretty straight line. I really do try to do specific things in my games, which I will talk about in a little while. And each game I've worked on, with the exception of that, actually, that was one. Well, I'm going to digress a little bit. Like I said, I'm a wordy bastard. You know, I was either the sort of driving creative force or the guy who sort of supported someone's vision that fit with what I think games need to be, and that progression I'll talk about later. This one I just didn't get. A guy came to me, one of my programmers, a lead programmer, came to me one day with the idea for this game, and he just spent 2 hours telling me what it was going to be, and I just said, I do not get this at all, but if you are that passionate about it, I'm not stupid enough to get in your way. So that's the one that doesn't fit. But the guy who made it burned to make this game, and if you don't burn to make a game, you can't succeed, by the way. And he burned to make it, and it succeeded. So went to Looking Glass and Ion Storm. So this is my wife, and she wants me to assure everybody those are toy guns, and we had just seen Hard Boiled, so it's no big deal. This was the infamous PC Gamer Game God Day, and I was just standing there going, oh my God, I can't believe I'm in a room with all these guys. That's an amazing group of people. And Ion Storm, one of these things is not like the others, but anyway. Hey, I love those guys, but one of those things is not like the others. So then at Ion Storm Austin, we made Deus Ex. This is the day we shipped the thing. We won some awards. We had some fun, you know, had some creative directors who are also brilliant designers working with me. Whoop, and I didn't want to do that. Hold on. Where was I? Okay. I think I was there. Okay. So as Frank said, I worked on some Deus Ex and Thief games. I will say I get way too much credit for the Thief series. I worked on that for about the first one for about the middle year of its 3 years in development. So all credit to Paul Neurath and Doug Church. And in fact, a lot of the reason I made Deus Ex was because I was frustrated at the Thief series sort of razor-sharp focus on you will avoid things as opposed to you will decide how to get past things. And the team just said, there's no way you can make a game that supports combat and stealth and role-playing all in one. And I said, oh yeah, I'll show you. And that's how Deus Ex came to be, out of frustration with Thief, a game series I love, but didn't particularly want to make. So then Junction Point, I left Ion Storm and IDOS in 2004, which terrifies me given that it's 2009 and I haven't shipped anything. I don't know why I looked at my watch when I talked about it. Anyway, I put that picture in there just because I like the fact that my dog's being eaten by a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And this was my team basically when I started. In the 5 years that Ion Storm, Freudian slip, Junction Point's been in existence, we've done concept development for a bunch of publishers and developers, none of which I can talk about. But got to work with John Woo, which is really cool, and some other film guys that I really can't talk about. And started working with Buena Vista Games, which was at the time Disney's game division, and eventually joined Disney Interactive Studios as a cast member, where I am now. And a lot of people think that's strange because I kind of make, I mean, by design, I like making mature games, not in the sense of, you know, ooh, violence, blood, you know, or sex mature, but just mature themes and mature ideas. You may disagree, but I think they're kind of mature. And Disney has a reputation for making sort of youth-oriented stuff. And I will say two things about this. First, It's a little bit of a misconception. Disney really has convinced me, at least, that they're about entertainment for everyone. They're entertainment for families, which at this point in my life and career I find very appealing. And also, I will say that I got my mouse ears very, very early. Okay, so there you go. Boy, have I seen some changes. That's Martian Dreams up there in the upper left, and Space Rogue, the first couple of things I worked on, and Wing Commander 1, and Underworld 1, and Thief 1, and Deus Ex Invisible War, and Thief Deadly Shadows. The most recent of these games is now 5 years old, and the progression is just astonishing, to me anyway. I mean, the fact that I've lived through this is, I mean, it's a gift, frankly. And I have a bunch of video, but I think I'll come back to this. I have video of Ultima 6 and Bad Blood and Space Rogue and Martian Dreams and Underworld. And that's Eric Hyman. I don't know why there's one frame of him I just couldn't get out of here. No, he's a great guy. He was a producer at Origin. And that's Richard Garriott, all pixely. I don't know why he's on there either. We'll come back to this. But lots of changes, but not just graphics, though that's the most obvious thing that's changed over the last 26 years. First of all, we're mainstream. Everybody talks about how we're bigger than Hollywood. I was telling someone earlier, I had the pleasure of, one of the things about working with Disney is you get to go to Pixar and stuff. And so I gave a talk at Pixar about game stories. And someone asked me how I felt about Roger Ebert and his opinions about games. And I just said, you know, I don't care. He's the representative of the medium of the 20th century, and I'm making the medium of the 21st. And then I realized what audience I was talking to, and that was probably foolish. But anyway. You know, a lot of people talk about how we're bigger than Hollywood. It's kind of bogus. You can make numbers say whatever you want, you know. We are demonstrably bigger than domestic box office gross, which is, you know, about the only way in which we're bigger than Hollywood. So, but we are definitely more mainstream than we ever were before. You know, so we're getting there. We have millions and millions of players. At this point, I mean, there was a recent study that showed that, what was it, 97% of you know, college and younger people had played video games and identified themselves as video gamers. That was not the case when I started. We have a more diverse audience than ever before, that's for sure. We're not just the geeks, and I don't know what the cheerleaders are doing there. But we really can make games for everyone now in a way that we couldn't before. We're even threatened by the legal system. You gotta love it. This too shall pass, by the way. Let's not worry about you know, all the threats to First Amendment rights, because all of these people will be dead someday and the problem will be solved. So, you know, graphics and a high public profile are great, but there's a big but, you know. They're not enough. And I still think that despite our popularity, despite the fact that we're, you know, whatever it is, $30 billion business, we have a lot of work ahead of us. If we're going to reach our potential, I think we have to start exploiting what makes us unique, okay? I think every medium, it's almost like, for me, it's a moral obligation to make games that couldn't exist in any other medium. If you're making stuff that, you know, that could exist in another medium, go work in that other medium, you know, get out of mine. So what is it that makes games unique? Let's talk about that for a minute. So there are 4 elements of uniqueness. And boy, that was a stupid thing to do on a slide. Okay, let's wait for this to get done. Okay. Like I said, this is kind of an experiment. We'll see how it works. Okay, the first one in my sort of pantheon of things that make games unique is that we have the power to transport. I will never fly a World War I biplane. I will never pilot a spacecraft. I will never dunk the ball like LeBron James, though I hope he's doing it in a Knicks uniform soon. I will never drive a NASCAR racing car unless it's at the Petty Experience at Disney World. I'm just not going to be able to do that. In games, I can do that. We are the first medium that can really make that a reality, in air quotes. We can immerse you in these worlds. We can create situations that are this close to convincing. They are this close to making you believe you're really there. Okay? And so we have an obligation to do that, I think. We require participation. You know, you have to help. The truth that dare not be spoken about games is that they are work. And what we do as game developers is we mask that work. We make that work enjoyable, okay? We make it so engaging that you don't even notice that you're working, but you're working. And if you don't work, we got nothing. And they're responsive. I couldn't find a picture that said responsiveness. That was as close as I could get. We're going to repay you for your effort, okay? If you act, if you take action and you participate, we'll repay that effort. So, you know, there are plenty of games that do this. More now, thank God. When I started giving this talk, you know, talking about my sort of philosophy of design and what I think we need to do, this list was a lot shorter. But there are plenty of games out there now that actually are gamey, that they actually meet those 4 criteria of uniqueness. But what makes these games special? Okay. The players interact in real time. It's not turn-based. It's not a thinking thing. It's an experiential thing. Players get to make choices that are significant to them. Okay, they make choices that mean something. The game responds, okay, in a way that no other medium has ever been able to do. Those choices that they've made have real consequences. Those choices result in a changed experience. And when we're at our best, everybody has a unique experience. No 2 players who played Deus Ex had the same experience. No 2 players who play Spore or The Sims have the same experience. That's something pretty new on this planet. In all cases, if you're a designer, if you're making games, and you're putting yourself ahead of your players, if you're showing off how clever and creative you are doing your players a disservice, and you are doing damage to our medium. I don't know why I say stuff like that. Oh well, anyway. Oh, and I'm being recorded, awesome. Okay, so how do we do this? Here's where I really start ripping. Okay, what we do is we give players tools, right? We give them tools. We give them tools to discover gameplay, or better, to create gameplay, to create the experience themselves. We provide a context for player action. We set up problems. We create problem spaces. And then we drop players in and say, hey, how are you going to use those tools to solve those problems, okay? So we sort of put a boundary around it, you know? We limit the experience without determining what that experience actually is. Amazingly enough, I mean, this is what we do. We accept players as our collaborators, okay, in what I call a shared authorship environment. It's not my game, it's our game. Orson Scott Card, you know, I mean, Ender's Game, if you haven't read it, it's a terrific book. It's the only book of his I can actually get through, and I just said that on tape too. But in 1991, he was a columnist for Compute magazine, which I'm probably the only person old enough to have read. But anyway, and he nailed this. I mean, he got it right. And what he said, I'm sorry about all the, okay, here's the wordy bastard part. Okay, he says, why aren't we letting players decide? Okay, there should be someone at every game development studio, he said, in 1991, whose job it is to ask the question, why aren't we letting the player decide that? Okay, and here again we have a failure of slide stuff. You know, he says the power of gaming, the power and beauty of gaming is that we collaborate together to tell the final story. Every time I talk to someone who's played one of my games, I'm having a real-world dialogue with them, but I've already had a dialogue with them in a sense. They've already had this little discussion with me about the story of the game. You know, every freedom is an artistic victory, and every needless boundary should feel like a failure. Those are powerful words, and I read those back in the day, and I have tried to live by them ever since. So, so here's what the developer does. We create the rules. I mean, games are rules, right? Without rules, there's nothing. I'm a very rules-oriented guy, even in my life, which drives my wife crazy. But we have huge power in this dialogue, in this collaboration. We create all the sounds and images. If we don't put something on the screen or play it through the speakers or allow it to happen, it can't happen. We offer the player those tools that I was talking about. I mean, it might be a gun, it might be a ladder you can place, it might be a door you can lock to keep your sim inside until they starve to death. We bound the action, but again, we shouldn't determine what the player does there. So the player's commitment, all the player has to do is say, I will act, I will play along, I will play along, okay? Games, as far as I know, are the first medium that requires participation, okay? If the player doesn't act, like I said, we got nothing. The game ends. You can walk away from a TV set and be pretty certain that the story's going to unfold without you. And you can put a book down and be pretty certain the pages aren't going to like rearrange themselves while you're not looking. If a player just puts the controller down, nothing happens, or the game plays itself, which means you should be working in another medium. Okay, but it's a special kind of participation, and it requires certain things here, okay? It requires that we allow players to devise meaningful goals, okay? In minute to minute, there's no reason on earth why a game can't offer players control over their experience, to set their own minute-to-minute goals. They have to be able to formulate their own plans, and then use the tools you provide to use those tools to execute against that plan, okay? And if we embrace this, then we have a situation where play style matters, okay? I'm a big believer in players setting the pace. I get asked every day by Disney, by my team, by everybody I talk to, well, what percentage of your game is combat and what percentage is exploration? And is it fast-paced or slow-paced? And is it a stealth game or a shooter? And it's like, well, I want players to decide that. I want players to decide what kind of experience they have as they explore my world, not me. It's a lot of work, but I think it's worth it. And at the end of the day, what I really want is for two players to talk about the same game and have a completely different experience. Okay, so if we embrace this, and this is kind of the big deal for me, we can allow players to think for real, not just solve problems like a crossword puzzle, not just like playing a Sudoku. I mean, those are pastimes, but we can actually allow players to think about real issues. Earlier I was telling someone about my happiest moment about Deus Ex wasn't people talking about how they solved a particular problem or got past a guard or whatever, although they had very different experiences at that minute-to-minute level too, which is cool. But it was following the forums after the game shipped. And instead of hearing, wasn't it cool when you leaped across the chasm and the giant tentacle came bursting through the window and you got all scared? And everybody says, yeah, it was cool when that happened to me too. They had a discussion that was very different. What they talked about was, how could you possibly think the world would be better off if there was no free will and there was a sentient AI that linked us all, No, wait, no, the world is way better off if you have a dark age. We're better off without the internet. We're better off without connections, but with free will. And it's a little pretentious, I know, but I'm a little pretentious, as a guy. And I love the fact that players could have that kind of discussion about a game, okay? Yeah, there's another story I could tell, but I probably shouldn't because it involves alcohol. Okay, so how do you know if you've succeeded in making a game of shared authorship? Well, if you listen to people talk and they say, wow, I never thought of that. There was a year after we shipped Deus Ex, I was watching our lead tester show the game off to somebody. And he was in, how many people have played Deus Ex? Holy cow, jeez, you're all the people who bought it. No, that's not true. It sold really well. Sorry, I'm joking. I'm totally joking. No, but there was, in the Statue of Liberty, no, I'm not going to go into detail. Trust me, there was a place that I had been thousands of times. I had watched thousands of people, play through that experience. There's one very simple problem that had to be solved. Get past some beams that would set off an alarm if you walked through them, and there were guards that were patrolling and everything. Anyway, I watched our lead tester try something. He's setting up this very elaborate plan, and I knew he didn't have a weapon heavy enough, powerful enough to get past the problem he was trying to solve, okay? But he was setting up this crazy multi-stage plan, and I was sitting there watching, thinking, is this gonna work? I could see what he was trying to do, and is that gonna work? And so it did, and I pretty much fell on the floor because a year after we shipped, thousands of playthroughs, someone tried something that I hadn't planned, the designer hadn't planned, no one planned, the player planned it, okay? I never thought to try that, and I made the damn game. People talk about, I always solved that another way. Everybody on the team thought I was crazy because my favorite weapon was useless. Well, it wasn't useless to me, there were people who would say, like, you would go on the forums and people would say, there's a jail under UNATCO headquarters? People don't even know it's there. It's that kind of thing where players make the game themselves and have their own experience. That's great. So if you're a game developer, and you're not enhancing the player's power, if you're just showing off, think again, okay? So I will leave you with my motto. This is going on my tombstone. I'm serious. I told my wife, this is not on my tombstone. In this, yeah, I might get sued over that. I don't know. Yeah, okay, anyway. I've tried my signature in the Walt Disney Fund. It doesn't work. Anyway, but I think those are words to live by. Try something great. Don't settle for something less. So there you go. That's my.
Thank you. Just hit these lights.
And if we have time and people want to see old amusing video, boy, do I have it.
All right. So now we're going to have a seat, and now I get to grill you. We get to the portion where I get to ask you a bunch of questions, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. And I hope you guys have questions, and we'll have a large-scale conversation. But to begin with, I just want to ask you about a couple things. One of the things I'm interested in is just a little bit of history. And I often think of your name and associate it with a certain school of gaming, which I tend to call the progressive school of gaming. Have you heard this?
No,
have you heard this?
No, I've never heard that.
So I think it's been associated with people like Clint Hawking, and I associate it strongly with your work and with a kind of philosophy of game development that's strongly associated with Looking Glass. And that particular studio, yourself and Doug Church and people that came out of that studio. So take us back there so what years were you at Looking Glass, and give us a peek into that world. What was it like? What was the environment like? What were you guys into? What games were you playing? How did the process work?
Well, let me go a little further back actually. There was a genesis of that school of design, and I really do think of it as a school of design. Yeah. But it actually started at Origin.
Okay.
It started with Richard Garriott. I mean, Ultima 4 was kind of a seminal game. It was the first game that I know of, or certainly that I experienced as a player, that was trying to do more than just what we called a Monty Hall dungeon back at TSR, where you just go and kill everything in a room, collect the treasure, go knock on the next door, kill all the monsters in there, collect the treasure. Ultima 4 was about what does it take to be an avatar? What does it take to be the avatar, and there were ethical questions that it raised. And so that's kind of where it started. When I started working with Richard, I will get to your question, by the way.
No, this is perfect.
When I started with Richard, I came in as kind of a paper game guy, a tabletop game guy, and I was going to teach all these electronic games guys, what interactivity was all about. And it took me about 2 weeks to figure out I knew nothing, And Richard and he was working on Ultima 6 at that time, and he and I sequestered ourselves at his house at Britannia Manor, and that's a whole nother story.
Like hidden stairways.
There are lots of hidden passages and skeletons in the basement. Yeah. Seriously. Anyway, we sequestered ourselves there for like a month, and planned out the Ultima 6 plot. And what I'll never forget this. He said, the way we're going to do this is we're going to plan out at least 2 ways to solve every problem every puzzle in this game. And so every puzzle we came up with, we always had to ask, well, how else could the player do it?
That's funny. That's almost sounds like a brute force method for producing emergence.
It was. Yeah. It was. But here's the deal. Here's the amazing thing. That was by design, and it was brute force, and it was grindingly hard, okay, and time intensive and crazy amounts of work. But I was watching one of the testers play the game. His name is Mark Shafkin. He should go down in history. He was playing a particular spot. We had failed in one puzzle. There was one place where we just said, okay, there's a portcullis here, players on this side, levers on the other side. You need the telekinesis spell to flip the lever. And we just couldn't come up with another way to do it. Well, it turns out that the portcullis had been modeled with enough fidelity that there was a little gap at the bottom. There were spikes at the bottom of it, and it was actually modeled there with collision, like for the spikes. And you could get a character named Sherry the Mouse in your party. And she was modeled with enough fidelity that she could fit between the bars. And so I watched Mark at that spot. He didn't have the telekinesis spell. I'm going to go like, He can't do it. He doesn't know. And of course, he sent Sherry the mouse under the portcullis to flip the lever and got through. Completely broke the game, but he was a tester. It's what he was supposed to do.
So is it possible if you hadn't put in those 2 solutions to every puzzle that they would have been there already? I mean, it seems like...
It's possible,
yeah.
I guess, but that was the moment where I said, there's something different about this medium. There's something that people haven't figured out yet, okay?
Right.
And so that's kind of where it started for me. And Paul Neurath, who founded Blue Sky Productions, which became Looking Glass, did Space Rogue for Origin. Man, that guy taught me a ton. I mean, he was the guy who taught me how to flowchart a story. I wrote all the dialogue for Space Rogue. I helped him with the overall flow of this interactive story. It was this crazy, Space Rogue, crazy cross-genre thing. Does anybody remember Space Rogue? It was a seminal game. I mean, it really was. It was totally forgotten. But it had an arcade element, a first-person perspective 3D space combat simulator, and a role-playing game, all sort of mashed together.
It wasn't the name wasn't a reference to Rogue, the PC.
Oh,
it wasn't a roguelike in any sense,
no. But it was this crazy seminal game, and you know, mixing of genres and weird, you know, simulation out in space. And Paul then went off and created Blue Sky, which came to Origin, more to the point, with Underworld. And here's with a prototype. And I remember looking at that. They showed it to all of us, and I remember people at Origin going, "Yeah, this looks okay." Yeah. I mean, this is the first fully texture mapped, real time, you know, 3D thing I'd ever seen in my life. And I was sitting there going, "Are you guys crazy? This is going to change the world, you know? Let me at it." And so I started working with the Blue Sky team. I was their external producer, and I started working with Doug on what became Underworld, okay? So what it was like, basically I would fly him down for months, I would go up there for months, but at that time I was still an Origin employee for Underworld 1, Underworld 2, and System Shock, okay? So I was a peripheral part of that culture, but holy cow, it was an amazing culture. It was very much, I think, an MIT culture, very competitive, crazy smart guys. I remember the first time I went up there, the team lived in a place called Deco Morono, the House of 10 Dumb Guys. And I am not kidding. I walked in there and they were having a conversation in Old English. And I'm not talking about like quoting, you know, John Donne or something. They were talking the talk, you know.
Were these guys, was it a programmer culture? Were they mostly engineers and programmers?
Absolutely.
You're not a programmer, right?
No, I am not. I am not.
So what was that dynamic like?
Well, you know, the fact is, the Looking Glass culture, and I think it really is an MIT thing, near as I can tell. Those guys are so well rounded. I mean, at Looking Glass, they were Renaissance people. Mm-hmm. You know, one of the programmers. He designs interactive fiction, award-winning interactive fiction, so he can write this stuff. Two of the programmers did all of the music for Underworld 2, so they all went off to harmonics to create Guitar Hero on, you know, frequency and amplitude and all that. These guys were all Renaissance people.
Because this is a particularly fascinating topic to me, the relationship of programming to game design and development. I'm not a programmer, and I've always had this slightly uneasy relationship to the discipline of programming, which I think is so essential to game development. I feel like, to the degree that I've learned to design games, it's really been a process of learning to think like a programmer to a large degree. And this is, I mean, there's a sense that this division gets diminished over time, that programming becomes its own separate discipline, and game designer is becoming more and more well established as a thing outside of programming. And then sometimes it seems like that's not the case. That if you look now at how much interesting and innovative stuff is happening in the indie scene, and in these experimental gameplay sessions, so much of that kind of interesting experimental stuff is really driven by the programmer designer. So this figure of this hybrid kind of Renaissance figure remains really central and important. And in terms of NYU and the Game Center, and thinking about how to create, you know, a program that's addressing this as an issue, I don't know. Do you ever Did you ever feel like, oh, I should learn to program so I can keep up with these guys, or do you feel like it's a value to have a non-programmer perspective?
Well, I hope there's a value to the non-programmer
too.
perspective.
Yeah.
But I have to admit that a day doesn't go by. I mean, literally 26 years of doing this, and a day doesn't go by that I don't think, wow, I'd be more effective if I were a programmer. You know, and I've picked up enough to be dangerous. I mean, literally dangerous. So I kind of, what I have to do at least, I can't speak for anybody else, but what I have to do is I have to find people I trust implicitly who buy into that philosophy that I just went through, who can help realize that, because I can't do it on my own. But the split of programming and design, I think, is it's a function of sort of the industrial nature of what we do, right? I mean, we are a software development business, and if you think we're not software development, you can't succeed. I mean, you will fail. Yeah. So you have to respect that this is software development, and you have to have programmers around. But making sort of, it's so ironic to call them mainstream games, because the mainstream of games is not mainstream, right? But you know, we're a niche product that overcharges for its product. That's kind of what we are. But hey, more people will see a failed television show than will play the most successful game of all time. So let's sort of keep humble here.
Is that true?
Think about it. I mean, there hasn't. I think the best-selling game of all time is like what, 20 million? Like, oh,
yeah, but failed TV shows.
Okay, so maybe I exaggerate to make my point. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. No, okay. I exaggerated to make a point. Yes. Okay.
Let the record show.
Anyway, if you're going to make a AAA sort of industry game, you need an assembly line, and that means you need designers who are trained in the craft of design. Right. And there are plenty of places that are doing that better than I ever thought possible.
Now, are you only interested in making AAA large-scale games? Would a Warren Spector ever be interested in like a smaller project with a smaller team, doing something that,
Yeah, I'm trying to decide how much trouble I want to get in with Disney.
Yeah, this is it. Come on, turn off the mics for 1 second. Now tell us.
No, I have to say that I typically, I've made 19 games, and I tell all the publishers I talk to that if I ever tell them I can make a game in 12 months or 18 months, I'm lying. Just look at the last 6 games I made, took between 32 and 36 months. So pretty much that's what it's going to take. But I have to say, I would very much like to do smaller things that require less commitment. I mean, there are all sorts of, ideas are not the hard part of this business. Everybody I know has lots and lots of game ideas. And there are more than I'm ever going to get to work on because I work in that mode. So I would desperately love to make small stuff. And frankly, this year at GDC, I often kind of despair for our future. And with costs, because with costs going up and teams getting bigger, and you need to sell 2 million copies to break even. I mean, that's a broken business model.
Yeah, but it's a good time to be a person who plays games, right? I mean,
sure, a lot of good absolutely. Games no question about that. Yeah. No question about that. But the business side of it, the development side of it, has become very different. And I have to say, I found the IGF, the Independent Game Festival booth, and John. There's a laser satellite with mouse ears in geosynchronous orbit above us right now. I am so dead.
Strike team, go in.
Oh man.
Okay, but
I found that really.
Okay.
I take great hope in for our future from that.
So let me play Greg Kostickian then to your Warren Spector for a minute and say,
we went to high school together.
So
right?
haven't you contributed a little bit to that problem with your body of work, right, in the progressive school of game design, which really is about these super expansive, large scale, operatic kind of environments and storytelling, and that's what people now kind of consider necessary for a game to really be sophisticated and meaningful. For a lot of people, that's what it means.
2 to 5 million people, that's what it means. Again, look at the sales figures for a best-selling game. I mean, a really, really successful game sells 5-6 million copies.
Yeah, but I mean,
and not that that's a small audience,
right?
But it's not like The Incredibles or WALL-E or something, right?
Right.
Okay, so yes, mea culpa. Okay, I will take some responsibility. No, I was talking to Doug Church a couple of weeks ago, and we were lamenting that there are all these interesting things we want to do, And there really doesn't seem to be a way to explore those things in a low fidelity, small scale way.